Well, welcome everybody to another episode of Spartan Theology. I don't know if you guys can see me. Let me know. It seems like it just went like completely black, but not quite sure if that's what happened on your end or not. Like I said, you can see in the chat I posted a few things. Oh no, you can see me. Cool. Well, yeah, welcome to another episode of Spartan Theology. We got a really exciting show today. I haven't done a stream in a while. And if you've been following me on Twitter, you'd know why. My wife just had twins, so we're kind of figuring all that stuff out. But I finally got some. You're good. I think that means I'm good. Yeah. But we had twins, and we're trying to figure all that out. But I got some time to do a stream. And mine on your note here telling me it's quiet or whatever. And I think it is. I changed it. I'm going to turn it up before. I bet that's better. But, yeah, so we're kind of figuring that out. But, like I said, I got an exciting stream today with Dr. Josh. We're going to kind of just be talking about the Old Testament and, like, how do we have better conversations as both Christians and non-Christians. And I'm really excited. Yeah, so excited. So let me pull him in here real quick. And, yeah, welcome, Dr. Josh. So if you could, I'm pretty sure most people watching my channel probably know who you are. But if you could kind of just, like, introduce yourself real quick, and then we'll kind of get started with the conversation. But yeah, just kind of introduce yourself. What makes you such an expert on this topic, and why should we listen to what you have to say?
Well, we can just stop now.
Yeah,
we're done because you don't have to. Ethan, thank you for having me on. Yeah, so Joshua Bowen. I was a Christian all my life, fundamentalist evangelical Christian, really from about the age of 5 or 6 until I think I was 30 or 31. So, I pastored a church out in Virginia for 7 years. I got a master's in divinity from Capital Bible Seminary. A master's in theology at Capital Bible Seminary. And then I got my PhD in Assyriology from Johns Hopkins University, where I minored in Hebrew Bible. I'm certainly not like the best in any one of those things. There are people that leave me far
Mm-hmm.
behind, but I feel like I know enough to be useful, particularly in this forum. So Megan and I mean primarily Megan, run a YouTube channel called Digital Hammurabi. At this point, I'm more of a helper because she's just running with it. But we, she also, I met her at Hopkins. So she's an Assyriologist as well. And we just want to bring the ancient Near East and the Hebrew Bible sort of in a fun, palatable way to people that are interested, but maybe not specialists in those areas. So we do a lot of videos, and we have lessons on Sumerian, and if you want to learn Sumerian or if you want to learn Hebrew, I've got a free Hebrew series on the channel. So yeah, that's what we do.
Perfect, nice. Yeah, so I'm sure a lot of people are familiar, and like I've seen you on a number of debates and stuff, and I really appreciated like the way you come to it as not being a Christian or Jew or anything, like not holding this as like a sacred text, but you aren't like some of these. I don't want to like not naming any person, one particular, but you're definitely not like an atheist apologist. You know what I mean? Like you're not just trying to debunk the Bible or whatever. You're just trying to bring like what the actual scholarship on these topics actually says, and that's what I really appreciated. Like hearing some of your interactions and whatnot. And as someone who became a Christian later in life myself, I became a Christian not because like the Bible is this divinely inspired book or whatever that just convinced me to be a Christian, or like the historicity of the resurrection. Like I just was convinced that there was no other way to that's not why I'm a Christian. So when I see some of these debates you're a part of, I just don't understand like the such strong like pushback and like planting the Christian flag, on some of these topics, like the dating of Daniel, which you just did a debate on. And it seems like when I look into these things that as far as like if you go to a university like Yale or who you've talked to, Dr. Joel Baden, who I've been following a little bit after seeing him on your channel, like, and you went in there and said, you know, I think Moses wrote the entire Pentateuch, they'd be like, why are you here, you know? And I just think that's like ridiculous. Like, so I just don't understand why, like, yeah, I want to learn to have better conversations with people and not like feel the need. I don't feel any need to just like hold the Christian position on this thing or whatever. So yeah, I'm just kind of like get a little bit of your thoughts on that idea. I know I kind of like just rambled a little bit, but I know you.
No, I think all that's spot on. So yeah, I like one of the things that I wrestle with. I understand where it's coming from. So maybe I'll couch it this way. I came out of fundamentalism, right? So when you come out of fundamentalism, for better or for worse, there's a certain mindset that you have. And it's something that I think we all need to nuance. But when I look around, particularly where I am, I'm down in Southern Maryland, fundamentalism is pretty strong. And if you press somebody, on a particular thing, they're going to kind of go, I don't know. But I mean, like, yeah, sure, Moses wrote the Pentateuch, if they even know what the word Pentateuch is, Moses wrote that, that's what I understand. And, the prophecy in Daniel obviously is. So those are things that are in many ways, very strongly held. And so that's what people like. I think people like me, and I'm thinking of some other online atheists that I really like. But that's I think they've also come out of that. And so what I'll hear as what I think is probably an overreaction to this is like, Bronze Age goat herders. That's the one that always comes to mind. And I understand it, right? I get the reaction, I get the mentality, because I think it's reacting against the other end of the spectrum, which is, these people in the ancient Near East were just horrible, terrible, wicked, awful people, but the God's people, they were the best of the best, and they knew science, and they knew, they knew that evolution is total, nonsense. And so I get it. I get the reaction. I don't think it's a good reaction, right? I think of the biblical text like I think of any other ancient Near Eastern text. And if you know anything about me, that means you know that I hold it in very high regard. And so I think it's very important to study, for example, the Enuma Elish, or the Gilgamesh cycles. I think those are, of course, I wrote my dissertation on Sumerian literary and liturgical texts from the early second millennium BCE, and I loved it. I love that stuff because it's really important. So because of that, I think that, if we're thinking about trying to have better conversations, on the one hand, I think that all of us need to recognize that there is a significant part of at least the American population, in my experience, that I interact with, that still hold to this fundamentalist approach. And that's mostly what I'm responding to, be it emotionally or intellectually, whatever. But that I think that people that still hold those positions need to realize that it's totally unnecessary. And I'll give a quick example and then I'll stop rambling. There is a good friend of mine named Jay Caballero. He's getting ready to finish his PhD. I think actually he just did his HAP scholarship interview on the channel, I think last weekend. But he was a defense attorney for 20 years. And then he went to University of Texas, Austin, and studied under one of my favorite scholars right now, Bruce Wells, and studying ancient Near Eastern law. And he's just such a nice guy, but he's an evangelical Christian. And he came on to Derek Lambert's channel, Myth Vision, and the three of us just kind of sat around and talked, and talked about ancient Near Eastern and biblical law, because that's what he specializes in. And it was like just an introduction to it. And so many times during the conversations, I could Derek voiced his his internal response to some of the things that Jay was saying, because it was like, yeah, there was slavery, there's debt slavery, chattel slavery, and sex slavery in the Hebrew Bible, and like you could, this visceral reaction that you can see a lot of fundamentalists having to that. And I said, and he asked him, Jay, how is it that as an evangelical you can say that, sort of rhetorically, to draw that out? And Jay was like, yeah, I mean, I think that's not a necessary. There's no reason to deny that. There's no reason to fight against that, which I think is sort of tying into what you were saying earlier. Those things do not nullify Christianity, and I think it's okay for fundamentalists to just sort of get used to the idea we can let that stuff go, and still hold to the Christian faith in a real way, in a genuine way.
Yeah, for sure. And it's just like, the way I see it, it's just the fact of the matter, like you just, at some point, you either have to just decide, like, I don't know, you just have to deny or you become like basically a conspiracy theorist or whatever, and just like, and that's another thing I want to touch on. Like, I've noticed a lot of people, they basically go to the idea that, like, oh, all these non-believers, they just start denying, like, the truth or whatever, because, like, but it's weird, because, like, even if like, say Moses did write all 5 books of the Old Testament, and we knew that for a fact, like, we had the original version, whatever, like, you could still be an atheist, you know what I mean? It wouldn't, like, it wouldn't be like, okay, now God has to exist because we have this book that some guy wrote, like, that's where I don't understand it, because, like, it's one thing if it's part of your faith or whatever. It's like, it's just weird that they, like, think that there's this ulterior motive, like they just don't want to believe that or whatever, when in all reality it wouldn't change. I mean, for yourself, like, say they did an archaeological dig and found, like, literally the Pentateuch was written by Moses, like, you probably wouldn't become a Christian, like, that's...
Yeah, I mean, I would...
I'm sure it would change things, obviously.
It would be a paradigm shift without a clutch.
Yeah. I mean, it's not going to happen, but, yeah, it wouldn't... It's not, like, the way they make it out to be, I think.
Yeah. I think there are certain hills that I understand dying on, at least from one perspective. So, like, the prophecies in the book of Daniel are, to a lot of people, really, I would say, far more important than, let's say, whether, Ezekiel's prophecy against Tyre failed, right? I think one of those is easier to reconcile theologically. Well, yeah, I mean, I think they're both easy to reconcile theologically, but if you
just deny
Ezekiel 26 fails and Daniel 2, I mean, Daniel's written in the 2nd century. I don't think I know it's not the death knell in any way to Christianity. If you think so, you need to have a conversation with Stephen Cook out of Virginia Theological Seminary, who's done a lot of work on apocalyptic literature, and, like, the dating of the book of Daniel is, of course, it's written in the 2nd century, but that doesn't affect his faith at all. It fits right in with his paradigm. So I guess I get, like, but I understand somebody who says, oh my gosh, look here, in the visions of, Daniel in particular, 7 to 12, my God, like, this is like predicting the future from Daniel's perspective. Or they've read Harold Honer's book and they say, "Oh my gosh, it's predicting Jesus, coming, in the 1st century CE, down to the day, and so that, it speaks volumes, and so to lose that, I think, is far more jarring. And this is the thing, like, for me, I mean, the reason that I became an atheist is because I went to a seminary all 6 years where what we did was, like, pound the languages, and they were pounded into us. And, like, that was our big thing, was Greek and Hebrew and Aramaic and Ugaritic and blah, blah, all these things. But it was sort of understood that, look, you don't, here's an apologetics class. Look, here's how you can explain the Jonah story. Look, here's how you can explain this, but the reality is, look, have faith. God's got good reasons for this stuff. You don't have to go out and argue with non-believers because they're not going to listen to you anyway. That was sort of the rationale. And because of that, there wasn't this sort of nuanced way to work through these difficult passages and these difficult theological concepts. And so then when I got to Hopkins, and it was like, oh, look, like, here, read these Sumerian and Akkadian texts, and you go, what the, like, this is much earlier, and this came from there was no, it was jumping into really hot water. There was no slow boil that allowed me to, stay in it. So
yeah, and that's like, that's something I definitely like resonate with. That's like that's like a big reason why I think this is important, though, because I mean, if you just realize what the facts are at the onset or whatever, you're not going to have this jarring moment where you realize like everything you've been told is basically a lie. Like, yeah. I think it's just what do we have, right? Like, what is actually there, and that's what I'm kind of trying to figure out, and that's why I really appreciate. And when I saw your new book, which I think we can kind of move towards now, like your new book, which seems really, really interesting. And so for anybody that hasn't heard, Josh has a new book coming out soon called The Atheist Handbook to the Old Testament, right? That's, and yeah, so I guess I'll just say kind of like as I was like thinking about it, and then if you could kind of just tell people a little bit about like what the book, like what's the goal of the book, kind of who's it written to and whatnot. And obviously, like the title says a lot, but I had a thought, and the only reason I'm going to say this now is because I'll probably forget with my ADD or whatever. But like, as I was thinking about it, and people that know that this is not what the book is about, but I think someone just coming across a book called like The Atheist Handbook to the Old Testament, some of these like Christian sees that, or where they're like, oh, this must be like an atheist who picked out went through and like found every single like contradiction and issue that, like, even if it's fringe or whatever, this is how you atheist, basically a guide to debunking the Old Testament, and that's not at all what it is. So yeah, if you could kind of just touch on what the new book is, the goal and like the audience and whatnot, just tell people a little bit about it.
The title is sort of born. So I wrote this book last year, did the Old Testament endure slavery, and that title, it worked. It appeared to work for no one. So, for every atheist, not every, obviously, but man, I got so many comments from both sides. The atheists that commented, negatively would say they assumed that the answer was no, right? So it was ambiguous enough they thought it was no, and so they, of course it did, and here's this verse, and they, oh my God, just go read the book. But then I got a lot of responses from Christians, obviously, who understood the rhetorical answer, or the answer to be implicitly yes. And so with this book, I thought, all right, I need to make it abundantly clear in the title, like what this thing's about. So the reason that I initially got onto YouTube, really onto social media, I think at all, is I used to watch a lot of Aaron Ra's debates. And most of them were against like Ken Hovind, right? But I started, because I watched so many of those debates, I caught some other ones that he did, and I heard him engaging with certain online apologists who would say things very regularly like the Hebrew says X or the Greek says X. And as I listened, I thought, well, gosh, it doesn't really say that. And I know that Aaron doesn't, isn't like equipped to be able to respond to those things, which it's not, it's not really what he does. And so I ended up emailing him. I emailed the Non Sequitur show because I heard things going on there as well that were similar. Anyway, this was the reason that I got into all of this, at least into the biblical side of this, because I hear atheists getting picked on a lot. And I am absolutely sure that this happens with Christians as well. There's no question. But it's because of my community where I am. This is what I see, and I think it's important, even if it's happening on both sides, at least to try to address one, if you can. And so, what I've noticed is that and again, most of these debates and what this book is geared toward is answering fundamentalism. So many of the fundamentalist claims. And what I hear in these discussions is, or these debates is the atheist or the skeptic will say, how can you serve a God that would do, the genocide that we see in 1 Samuel 15? And the response from the Christian apologist is almost always, well, what's the context? The context of this. And the atheist says, no, but why do I need to know the context? And then that's the end. Mm-hmm. Because the apologist goes, or the fundamentalist says, well, if you don't even know the context, I don't even have to talk to you about this. You're not worth my time. And so the whole purpose of the book is it necessary to know the history of the Amalekites in order to say genocide is bad? No, but it helps. Right? That's the point. It helps. And so the book it comes at these debates, these discussions that atheists have with, again, normally fundamentalist Christians from two angles. It gives a very general and broad background to the Hebrew Bible, to the Old Testament, both in the narrative itself and historically, and also archaeologically, explaining how archaeology works, what biblical archaeology is, and so on and so forth. And then it addresses specific issues, and this is volume 1. And so the 4 issues that are in volume 1 are: did Moses write the Pentateuch? The dating of the book of Daniel, slavery in the Bible, and it's different than the book that I wrote because I go into the New Testament and the early church, and antebellum slavery, all those things a little bit. And then the final chapter is on the prophecy against Tyre in Ezekiel 26. So it's general, gives background, so you're well-rounded in what the Bible says, not just historically, like did the Exodus happen or did the conquest happen or any of that stuff, but what is it that the narrative's actually trying to tell you? What's the story? And then it gives you these specific things to be armed with. And I think it's useful, last thing I'll say, I think it's actually useful for both sides. Even if you do come to this book and you say, well, I know that Daniel's written in the 6th century, it's a good idea to read what the other side's saying. If you're going to formulate an argument, this debate that I just did with Jim Majors, who, by the way, is the expert on that, not me, in that debate. But, almost none of the points that we were bringing up about the historicity of the book were addressed, because the whole argument was focused very, very late on, Greek and Roman historians. And I think it's really important. I walked away from that going, well, I'm not sure they actually know what the arguments are against it. They might, but it didn't seem like they do. So I think it's important to know the other side.
For sure. And as I hear you say that, I'm curious, as someone who's not in academia or whatever, is there, you mentioned the other side or whatever, but I'm sure in a university context, it's not that you got your Christians over here who hold to this or whatever, and your atheists over here who hold to this. It's everybody just kind of, this is what we have. And some people might believe that maybe they might hold they could be even a little bit more on the fundamentalist side, and hold to certain things, but they're not necessarily debating and using a lot of the arguments and ideas that we see with apologists.
We all know the data points.
Yeah,
we all
exactly.
know the data points, and it's probably a good example of this. I like to tell the story. I went to the ASOR meeting, I think in 2019, and I was out in Denver, and I hadn't seen, you go there and you see all your colleagues, and I hadn't seen my best friend Caleb from Hopkins. He's at a Tyndale now, and he's an evangelical Christian. He went to Trinity, and he was a year behind me in the Hopkins program. But Caleb's brilliant. He's writing on Neo-Assyrian royal inscriptions from, I think, Ashurnasirpal II. but I mean, like he's sharp, Caleb's sharp, and we have the same degree, right? And so he knows what I know, and I know what he knows, and he's still an evangelical Christian. And so, like, everybody, like, keep that in mind, because I think that's important to recognize. And now, if you ask him, and I don't want to speak for him, but I've had these conversations with him. And I said, well, you know, how do you know? Because we know we basically have the same data points, right? How do you know that, you know, that Jesus is your Lord and Savior? And he said, well, I've had a personal experience with Jesus Christ. So it's not like his first response is, let me give you all the evidence for the resurrection, right? Or let me tell you about how prophecy, you know, his response is, I know that Jesus is you know, like, I know God is real and that Jesus has saved me, as much as I know the sun's going to come up tomorrow. But it's a subjective thing, and I really appreciate that about him. But anyway, to couch all of that, I remember we were at Azor, and I was having a cup of coffee with him, and he said, so what's going on with your YouTube channel? Because we had started it like a year before. I said, oh, it's really cool. I've just put together this series and wrote a small paper, you know, to publish, I mean, to put on our website for people about Ezekiel 26. And we both took Ezekiel together with Ted Lewis and at Hopkins. And he said, what about it? And I said, oh, well, you know, like, it says that Nebuchadnezzar's supposed to take Tyre, and then chapter 29 shows that he didn't. He said, yeah. I said, yeah, well, you know, it's like a failed prophecy. And he said, is that debated? Apparently. He said, that's weird. Why would, of course that's what it says. Like, why would that be debated? And I think people need to recognize that you don't have, that's not one you got to hold on to. Go read Chris Udd. He's got a 2005 article on this, you know, or go read Chisholm's 2010 article, or really any other, you know, evangelical biblical scholar. I disagree with the theological conclusions that you know, about how prophecy is being used there or whatever, but there are answers for that, and one of them doesn't have to be, you know, oh, well, you're, you know, it actually, you know, it didn't fail, you know. So anyway,
yeah, exactly, that's kind of what I'm getting at. There's like, we just have to accept what we have and then go from there, and you know, there's answers for sure. And whether or not you want to, like, different people hold different ideas, it's not like, and that's what I appreciate, you're not necessarily saying, like, you're not starting with the conclusion that, like, the Bible is this, like, made up nonsense or whatever, and, like, this is why. You're just basically arguing, like, this is what we have, I want to explain this to people and show people, and it's just, and then, like you said, and go from there. And it's weird when I see some of these debates and you're debating, you know, like, you're debating the data points. It's like debating, like, the fundamental, like, facts we have in a science experiment, or, you know, it's like, you don't debate, like, the length of the measurement or whatever, but you can debate the conclusion that you come to. And that's what's weird about a lot of these online debates. It's like, we're just debating the facts of the matter. This is basically pointless, you know.
I think a good example of that sort of thing is, you know, there's with the slavery issue, for example. I do think that, and I think it's incorrect, but it's a theological conclusion, and I think that's fine. To argue something like God is, and actually Jay Caballero said it this way, and I thought it was really nice how he said it. He was talking about Leviticus 25, and he said, you know, in the Deuteronomistic source, you have a development from the covenant code, but then when you get to you know, when you get to Leviticus 25, they get rid of debt slavery for Israelites completely. And he said, look, in my opinion, theologically, if I put my evangelical hat on, you got to get rid of your own slavery before you can get rid of all of it, right? Now, I disagree with that as what's, you know, what I think is going on there, but, like, I think that's a very reasonable conclusion. And I think that's why I think that going to something like Matthew 19 and showing this, like, divorce principle, I don't think that's crazy. I think it's wrong, but I don't think it's crazy. And I think there are problems with it, but I think if you're going to make an argument, you have to have the one that, as you say, addresses all the data points. We all have to have the same data points, and we all have to put them together. It's just how we put them together and what we draw, what conclusions we draw from that. We don't just want to deny 5 of the data points,
Exactly.
That doesn't work.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like perfectly reasonable to think that people are going to come to different conclusions even using the same data point. I mean, that's just, we all have different background information. We've all had different experiences in our life. All this stuff plays into how you understand these things. Yeah. So it doesn't bother me to think that, like, I come to a different conclusion than you, and that doesn't bother me. But it does bother me when I, like, think about, I know this, like, thing for a fact. Like, I heard that, I just go back to Daniel was written the early date or whatever, and I know that for a fact, and then I hear you and, like, contradict, like, all these, like, actual, like, well, this is either true or not. You know what I mean? Like, the conclusion takes a lot more to develop it, or and I agree that one is either true or not. Sure, I'm not like saying there's like a subjective reality or anything, but it's more reasonable to think we would come to a different conclusion even going off the same facts. But as far as, like, denying the facts, I don't see the point. That's what I'm trying to get away from. But so kind of moving forward, I'd like to touch on, like, a few of the topics in the book, though, as we go forward. And I know, like you've said, and I'm sure a lot of people in the chat, if they've heard you around, like, you're not an expert on these topics. Like, that's why you cite people in your book and stuff, and don't come to you, like, but you're very good at, like, compiling the information.
Yeah,
so
I feel like that's my role here. I feel like a general practitioner.
There you go.
Like a medical doctor, the general practitioner. And I can tell you, like, you come to me and you say, hey, my leg hurts. I'm going to look at your leg and say, okay, look, I've had a little bit of experience, but you really want to go talk to the knee specialist. That's who you want to go. Let me write you a prescription. And that's what I'm doing. That's what I feel like I'm good at, is I have the ability to do the research, like got the training to do the research or whatever. But there's no reason for me to become the expert on the neo-documentary hypothesis when I can just go at Joel Baden. Exactly. And hopefully he doesn't hate me for typing at Joel Baden. But, at least I can say, hey, here's his book. You want to go read about it? This is it right here. And he's got all the bibliography, and he's a super nice guy, and he's probably done videos that you can just go watch. And so so that's exactly right.
Yeah. So exactly, and that's probably a good place to start. That's one I've been, like, looking into more, and, like, I saw Joel Baden on your channel, and recently there was a really good stream on Myth Vision channel with Joel Baden, and so as far as, like, the documentary hypothesis goes, and I think like obviously this is like a pretty important one, and this is one even I don't know. It's I think if you could kind of explain it, and but one thing that, as I look into this topic, that is for sure, there are multiple sources in the Old Testament. Like, no one denies that understands what's going on. Whether or not, like, the entire thing was compiled, like, super late and at different times, and how all that went about, sure, that's complicated. But did Moses write all 5 books of the Old Testament? No way. And did one person write all 5 books of the Old Testament? That's even completely off the table. So if you could kind of, like, just get into a little bit of that I think.
Yeah, sure. So, like, the chapter started out as sort of it was trying to be a balance between showing why it is that scholars, whether they hold to the documentary hypothesis or the supplementary hypothesis, whatever, why it is that they don't hold to single authorship. And then I was trying to give an introduction to the other hypotheses, and I actually sent it to Dr. Baden, and he had some really good comments that I'm so thankful he read that thing, because it's a completely different chapter now. Because one of the things that he said, amongst all the very important things that he wrote back, was I don't understand the point of your chapter. That's what he said. I don't understand the goal of your chapter. When I read through the other chapters, I get it. You're trying to argue a particular point, but this one just seems to be this ambiguous. Let me just sort of give you some information. He said, I would forget about trying to explain the ways that scholars do try to understand it in its formation, but just focus on why it is that they don't see it as a single authorship. And so that's what the chapter's all about. The chapter talks about, like, let's look at the flood story. Let's look at Genesis 37. Let's look at the two, chapters of creation in 1 and 2. And let's look at the naming of Bethel. And let's look at, and all these things. And, so that's the place to start, I think. And again, the place to go for this is Joel Baden's book, 2012 Composition of the Pentateuch. That's the place to start. Whether you end there or not, that's up to you. But I mean, like, he's going to tell you who says what and why. But when scholars, come to the narrative of the Pentateuch, and this is like Joel's primary example, Genesis 37. Ask yourself, when you read through the Joseph story, how did Joseph get to Egypt? And I think it's such a great question because it gets right to the heart of the issue. Did the Ishmaelites take him down, or did the Midianites? Right? You can't have both, and that's what Genesis 37 in its canonical form wants to give you, is like the Midianites do it, but also the Ishmaelites do it. And so the point is that in the narrative, the literary structure, it's not coherent, right? We can read it. I'm trying to think of another example that would be useful. Like the Gospels, like tell me the resurrection, right? Tell me the story of the resurrection. Well, or tell me the story of Jesus' birth. You probably have, Joseph and Mary coming down, and then, the wise men, and, then you go down to Egypt, and you'd have all those things, which would be an amalgamation of the four Gospels, or the Synoptics. But that's not dealing with any one source, right, on its own. And that's what you have here with people. So, like, what's the flood story? Well, people can kind of tell you what the flood story is, but then was it 40 days or 150 days, right? How many animals were taken on board? Is it just 2 of each, or do you have 2 and then 7 and 7? So that's the point of the chapter. So this is a fundamental thing that I think, if you watch the videos that Joel Baden does, or anybody that talks about the documentary hypothesis, Kip Davis has a video that, a couple of videos that I've seen on this, responding to inspiring philosophy. The point is not, all right, well, we've got the name Yahweh here, and we've got the name Elohim here. So that must be E and that must be J. That's not how this works. What they're doing is they're looking at the narrative as it stands, and they're saying, there seems to be a contradiction here and a contradiction here and a contradiction here. Something's going on. And it looks like these 3 contradictions, like these 3 sides of the contradiction, all work together. And these 3 all work together. And then you look at you go outside of the flood story and you go back to the creation story and say, oh my gosh, there's the story that's put together here fits the story that's put together here in chapter 1, but then this other story fits really well with chapter 2. Anyway, so you go based on the literary problems. They're not going based on, well, this vocabulary word is only used in E. And so this was a problem, I think, with the documentary hypothesis, and that's why it became problematic, because you ended up seeing like these lists, right, of vocabulary words, right? These are all the E words, and these are all the J words, and these are all the P words. So if you ever see one of these, well, that must be P. And it's like, I mean, maybe, but, it's Hebrew. They can use different words. Just a real quick example of that, my old professor, Glenn Schwartz, used to use the word ostensibly all the time. And he was the first person I ever heard to use the word ostensibly, but he used it a lot. Well, that might be a word that he's kind of known for using, but it doesn't mean that nobody else can say ostensibly, right? So if you see the word
Exactly.
ostensibly, you don't immediately say, "Oh, this must have been written by Glenn Schwartz." No, So anyway, so that's the sort of the jumping off point. Why is it the scholars posit not a single author? So the documentary hypothesis, very quickly, the documentary hypothesis says that we've got individual sources, an entire source, one that has its own literary coherence, and then you have another source that has its own literary coherence, and then another source, and they're brought together. They're woven together into this canonical form, and that is how we get this final form of the text. That's sort of the big picture. And again, Joel Baden does. I keep using him, but he's like the neo-documentary hypothesis guy. Like he explains it obviously so much better than I do. So go watch him. The other sort of main view that we see is called like the supplementary hypothesis, and again, sort of 30,000-foot view. You have groupings of texts, groupings of stories, maybe like the Jacob cycle, or you have the Abraham cycle or whatever, and they're brought together, and then you have these larger chunks of text that are brought together, like the patriarchal narrative is linked to the Exodus narrative, the Exodus story. And how do you link them? Well, you put a layer of narrative in. And you say, well, how do we get Jacob and Jacob's family all down into Egypt? Well, here's what we put this transitional story in that brings them down. And so that's the other view, and that's very European. That's a European look, and again, that's very overly simplistic. Go read people like Schmidt or Reinhard Kratz. Reinhard Kratz in a 2016 article has a really good sort of breakdown summary of this, of all of them, actually, the views. But that's sort of
no, that's really good.
Too much.
No, that's really good. That's really good. As far as like when you were touching on like why people hold to this idea of like multiple authors, I think you said it really well, and I heard the way Joel Baden said it, and I actually was watching, I think like last night or whatever, when he was on, he recently did Myth Vision, and he mentioned that like the plot is basically where we decide like, okay, something's going on here, and the style just kind of came along for the ride and realized that like, okay, this style like actually lines up. That's kind of, it seems like the plot pointed out that there's multiple sources, and the style kind of helps us to understand like that there's like a select few that kind of like have a flow through, a longer flow or whatever. So I think that that really helps for people. And something though I've been thinking, in that like when I first heard about this, I was like, okay, documentary hypothesis, that's just something atheists hold to or whatever, and I don't really believe that or, but as I've like looked into this more, I realized like there's actually like theological points that you can really like understand the text better. Like, what is the P source trying to say?
Yes.
What is the J source trying to say? You don't have.
That's exactly right.
And I think it really helps, and it's really like sad that like we have to just deny, like all these Christians just, oh no, that's just nonsense or whatever. That's just people that hate the Bible or whatever. And that. So that's why I've been really interested in like learning this, because I'm like, okay, I can understand the Bible better and like what it's actually trying to say, and I think that's really important.
I agree. Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe we'll touch on like one more topic, and then we have a few questions from the chat. We kind of touched on like the prophecy of Tyre in Ezekiel, but I think that's like a really good one that I think I can see you go into it a good bit in your book. It's like the last chapter or whatever. And that's really like an online one, I guess, as you've been saying. Like when you talk to your friends and stuff in scholarship, it's accepted. And that's one I think is probably real. Like I'm sure you did a really good job, and like can really like, it's what this book is for, right? Like the more controversial ones, that's for sure tough or whatever. That's But so kind of just like, what do you? Yeah, just a little bit on that one or whatever, and then we'll kind of get into a few questions.
So, because prophecy is one of the things that comes up a lot, as here's why I am a Christian. That we hear that a lot. That's sort of what how can you deny prophecy, right? And so then the first one that comes up is, well, wait a minute, prophecy failed at Tyre, right? And so this is why I think it's become such a hot button issue online, because biblical scholars will say, okay, you probably need to nuance your view a little bit, right? Let's look at the purpose of prophecy. But, I guess I'll get there in a second. So the prophecy against Tyre is, Jerusalem has just been destroyed, and Ezekiel's giving in 26 to 31, I think. 26 to 31, 32, I can't remember. He's giving there's sort of a certain style of prophetic oracles, and they're called the oracles against the nations. You see them in like Amos, you see them in Jeremiah. Anyway, basically what they're doing is they're calling out all the nations that are around Israel, and they're saying, woe to you, God is going to come and destroy you and rob you of your people and blah blah blah. It's you see Micaiah ben Imlah doing this sort of thing. Anyway, and this is what the prophecy against Tyre is in the middle of. It's in these oracles against the nations. And so Ezekiel says, hey, Tyre, this really wealthy city that's an island just off the coast over in Phoenicia, and they're like the center part of a major trade route in the Mediterranean. They've got a really good naval fleet, and but that there's so much trade that goes through that they're incredibly wealthy. And the chapter opens, Ezekiel 26 opens with Tyre essentially saying, ha ha ha, Jerusalem's been destroyed. The gateway of the peoples is now open to me, right? So ostensibly I'm going to get more trade or whatever. And so Ezekiel prophesies very harshly against them. And it's not just in chapter 26, in chapter 27, chapter 28, you see this long series of oracles against the city of Tyre. And the prophecy starts off kind of general, like many of Ezekiel's prophecies do. You have 3 or 4 or 5 verses that are kind of general, but then the literary structure follows this pattern, and he gets specific. And so he what he said generally in the first part, he now says very specifically and more developed in the second part. And so he says, many nations are going to come up against you, Tyre. The Hebrew, goyim rabim, many nations, many people groups. And they're going to tear down your walls and destroy you and throw you into the sea. You're going to be a place to spread fish nets. That's all you're going to be good for. Bare rock, right? The name Tyre means like a rock. So you're going to be a scraped, clean, bare rock. Well, then the second half of the prophecy, or the developed part of it, says, for I am about to bring Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, the king of kings, with horses and chariots, blah, 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 and a mighty, a large group of people and all this stuff. Well, if you read through the Jewish, like the early rabbis, and what they said about this, like you read through Rashi or, Ramban, you'll see that the way that they interpreted this was from the text itself, right? And so they don't have, ostensibly, they don't have this historical, ability, this historical information that we have to kind of go back and rely on, in the same way, anyway. And so they interpret it based on the text itself, and so they, this must have happened, right? But we know that Nebuchadnezzar didn't take Tyre, right? Looks like he went about 13 years in a siege, but didn't actually get there, didn't actually take it. And so in chapter 29, we get confirmation of this, where Ezekiel prophesies 15 years after the first, declaration, this first prophecy, and says, Nebuchadnezzar worked really hard. And every head was, pushed his army really hard. Every head was rubbed, every head was made bald, and every shoulders rubbed bare. but he had no wages. His army had no wages for all the work that they performed against Tyre. So I'm going to give him Egypt as payment, right? And so we know that it didn't happen. And it didn't happen actually until Alexander, right, in the late 4th century. And so this is a problem. This is a problem for a certain type of, usually a fundamentalist person who has a view of inerrancy that has to go a specific way. And that is that it looks like Ezekiel prophesied something that didn't come to pass, right? So what do? Well, there's a video series by Mike Winger. That's the one that comes to mind. It's the one that started this whole thing for me, where he says, and it's apparently he's using somebody else's arguments, which is fine. I'm not knocking that at all. I think that's good. But he's saying, well, the first part of the prophecy was about Nebuchadnezzar, but right here, I think at verse 11 is where it's at, 11 or 12. There's a shift in the pronoun from he talking about Nebuchadnezzar to they talking about the other nations that are coming in the future, and so that's talking about Alexander the Great, and it's a nice easy solve, right? So, yeah, sure, Nebuchadnezzar didn't take it, but the prophecy wasn't just about him; it was also about Nebuchadnezzar. So the point of the chapter is me addressing that. Mm-hmm. And the arguments that kind of go along with that. So is that really what's going on literarily, grammatically, syntactically? Does any of that work? No. And then I give just some suggestions that other scholars, evangelical scholars, who don't have a problem with this, what they've concluded. And one of the more popular ones, just very briefly, like Robert Chisholm wrote an article where he's talking about what is the point of prophecy, and he uses Nineveh as an example. So when you think about Nineveh, the prophecy against Nineveh, Jonah goes and he says 40 days and y'all gonna be wiped out, right? And then what happens? The people repent in the story. Mm-hmm. So God doesn't do it, right? And this is his argument, that this idea of contingent prophecy, that prophecy is always contingent. And so if the people repent, if the people change their mind and do what God says, that God can also change his mind. And this is the whole point of prophecy, is to get people to change. And there's something to that, right? I mean, there's no question that there's something to that. Is it what's going on in Ezekiel 26? I don't think so. I don't see evidence for that. I think you have to posit that whatever it is that the king of Tyre did, we don't know. And Chisholm says this, we know that Egypt also was not taken the way that chapter 29 said it was supposed to. And so he says, so the king of Egypt must have also, and the Pharaoh must have also repented in some way that we're just not told about. But that's a way that you can kind of deal with that from theological standpoint and have this not be problematic.
No, yeah, I think that's really good. Yeah, it's like, yeah, it's really interesting to really get into it, and it's just, yeah, I don't know. I think you explained it really, really well. So, thanks. Yeah. But we got some good questions. The first one was from John with Apocalypse Here, which is a really good one.
That guy.
Yeah, that guy. Exactly. He's already like asking for free books before we even started and everything else. But, yeah, he had a good one that I actually probably should have thought of myself, so maybe I gave him the idea, I don't know. But he says, what advice would you give to people who aren't trained in the relevant subject matter to begin researching and compiling information? A lot of people just don't know where to begin, and they kind of follows up with, people who have expertise can give non-academic folks compiled sources, like you can obviously tell them a list of books to read, but how do you empower people to understand and evaluate sources on their own?
Yeah, and that's the whole purpose of our channel, because our motto is, resist poor scholarship, right?
Yeah, the whole HAPS thing or whatever.
Yeah, the HAPS, Humans Against Poor Scholarship. That's what we're trying to do. And it's like, that's the question, because it's so difficult. Like right now, I'm writing a chapter for the second volume in this series, and it's on the Exodus, right? And what I can do, if I'm thinking, Hoffmeyer, I'm not an Egyptologist, but James Hoffmeyer makes this argument, he's citing Manfred Bitock, and I don't know, So I can get on the phone with Maggie Bryson, Egyptologist, and I could say, hey, Maggie, what do you think? She can roll her eyes over the phone or whatever. But, sorry. But, the point is, like John said, that we know kind of how to do that. So that's the other purpose of this book, is to be this sort of jumping off point. So here's how archaeology works. Like, here are the basics. And here are a couple of introductory books that if you want to get into it, these are reputable books. And once you have one, like, source that you can say, this is reputable, like it's put out by a reputable publisher. Usually it's not hyper specific in the argument that it's making. It's like John Collins' 2018 Introduction to the Old Testament of the Hebrew Bible. John Collins up at Yale, putting out an introduction, it's going to be good, and he's got 4 further reading at the end of each chapter. Those are wonderful books. Thomas Dozeman has a similar thing for the Pentateuch, 2010, I think. So again, recent, so it's going to have a bunch of fairly recent bibliographic citations. But just a basic place that you can start is the commentaries, right? And there are some commentary series that I, as a fundamentalist, when I was a Christian, I would have said anathema, right? There's no way, God forbid, right? Will I ever use the Hermeneia series or the International Critical Commentary? That's a little dated, but like the Anchor Bible commentary series. Like, never will I do that. Take a breather. Breathe deeply. You can do it. It's just those commentaries for the Book of Daniel, for example, excellent. The Word Biblical Commentary series. John Goldingay did that one. Yeah, John Goldingay is a Christian, right? And he does a phenomenal job with it, I think. And it's very balanced. Now, again, he's a second century, holds to a second century, and I think he makes really good arguments for it. But he will cite Tremper Longman. And Tremper Longman III, another evangelical scholar, who for theological reasons, which he will tell you, for theological reasons, he holds to a 6th century date. But the point is that that Goldingay's commentary, it's in a great series, it's in a reputable series, and it's recent, it's 2019, and he's got this huge bibliography. So, I guess those are really great places for non-specialists to start. Get yourself, I want to say get my book. That's a good place to start. But if you don't want to do that, that's absolutely fine. Go get Mark van de Meerop's. Actually, I probably have it sitting here. Yep. History of the Ancient Near East. Go grab that bad boy. I think there's actually a newer edition of this. This is 2007. But, grab these sort of basic history books. I guess the bottom line for people listening is simple answer. Email me. I'll find out. Mm-hmm. If I don't know, I'll find out.
Yeah, I think you touch on a few things that are really important. Like, one, not everything you have to read has to be like this brand new kind of like controversial work or whatever. There's a lot of value in reading like the classic, basic, and but as well as just the fundamental text that like a lot of people have read that are working off of. That's really, really important. That's something that I never used to do, and that's pretty recent to my study has been starting to do that. So I've started watching her Christina Hayes, where it has the Yale series on YouTube. Like, they have the whole lecture series, and she talks about. I actually went to the library and picked up this commentary, the Nahum Sarna or whatever. I definitely don't know how to say it. Yeah, exactly. Yep. And I started reading that, and I have the Kaufman book about religion of Israel that she talks about in that series. I'm trying to read more of these works too. I think that's really important, and that's something when you read these things, you can find a lot of people talking about them and stuff, so you can get a good understanding. I think that's really important. And then as well, you touched on like the commentary. There was something else I wanted to say. Jeez, I had like another thought for sure. Like literally left my mind. Whatever.
I will say one important thing as to sort of be able to recognize, and this one's the hard thing to do, is to recognize the fringe position. That can be difficult. And that's why on our channel, for the most part, we have a couple of videos that don't follow this pattern. There's a reason they don't follow that pattern, but for the most part, what we talk about is consensus scholarship. And the reason that we do that is not that we think that consensus scholarship is right in everything that it says. Nobody would have a good dissertation if that were the case. The whole point of doing a dissertation is to come up with new research that pushes consensus forward. It challenges it. And anyway, but for the most part, on these topics, everybody's going to agree on the main points for most of this stuff. So somebody tweeted at Joel Baden today and said, hey, it sounds like you adhere to the documentary hypothesis, which I thought was so funny. And he just tweeted back with a picture of his book. and they said, well, how many scholars hold to this like source theory thing? And he wrote 103%.
Okay, yeah, I actually did see you retweet that. Yeah. That's funny.
But the way to sort of figure this out is, let's say you read somebody like John Walton, right? And I like John Walton as a person. But he holds some what I could only call non-consensus positions. And he's been critiqued for that, right? And I think rightfully so. And I think he understands that his positions, for example, like in Genesis 1, some of the ways that he interprets the verbal forms. I mean the verbal ideas there. But if you're reading John Walton, or you're reading I shouldn't have used his name. If you're reading some people, and you find that when you go to like a mainline commentary that they're not arguing these points, and you go to another mainline commentary and they're not arguing these points, it's a good idea to run that by somebody before you go making a video, saying, well, and because I'm thinking of somebody in particular that cites John Walton a lot, and I think cites Christine Hayes a lot. And some of these concepts are very complex. And before you go, if you pick up the Hermeneia commentary, or you pick up the Anchor Bible commentary, that's another great resource, by the way, the Anchor Bible Dictionary. That 6-volume series, it's 93, it's a little dated. Man, get it. If you can, if you got $300, grab it. Because those articles are worth their weight in gold. Anyway, but if you find your position that you're arguing, you keep picking up commentaries and none of them agree with you, run that by somebody before you make a video about it, because there's a reason, probably. Yeah,
for sure. So and as you were talking, I remember. What I was going to say is, a lot of people like yourself, but plenty of other scholars would love to get emails from people and answer questions. Like, it's something I've learned from starting my YouTube channel. You see these people, you think they just a lot of people want to share what their knowledge with people or whatever. So you can definitely reach out to someone and ask questions, and you will get a lot of answers from people.
Be aware. There's a fine line. Maybe it's not so fine, between saying, hey, I've run up against something here, and I just need a two-line response. Please don't spend all day researching this or whatever, just if you know it off the top of your head. And all right, the following 9 paragraphs have 16 questions that each one is going to require 9 hours each of research. I'd like this back by Tuesday, please. We get those, and those are ignored.
I guess I think about myself being someone who is afraid to reach out to people, but I forget there's other people out there too that are not afraid to basically just put someone they've never met to work for them. So
right, exactly. That is a great way to say that, to put us to work.
but I mean, a lot of people too. Like you can ask a question and get to know people. You know, that's like another thing too. So there's just like, if you're really interested in these topics, there's definitely like what you're saying. Like you basically you gotta start with fundamentals. It's the only way you're ever gonna really understand the things. You can't just read someone like brand new book on this and like that's way down the line, having never read any of the fundamentals. You're not gonna fully understand it. So the fundamentals. If
I could give a very basic example, something that comes up all the time, I'll make it very, very quick.
No, go ahead.
Ancient Near Eastern law collections, you know, you think about the Code of Ornamu, the Code of Hammurabi, you know, Lipit Ishtar, the Middle Syrian laws, New Babylonian laws, all this stuff. We look at them and we think, okay, well, these were like the laws of the land. So when a judge sat down, a judge said, I will hear your case now, and they say, all right, this guy stole my slave, and the judge says, okay, well, I remember from the Code of Hammurabi. Let me just check that. Okay, yeah, that's right. Okay, so this is what we're going to do, because the law, Hammurabi tells us that the law, that's not what they were, right? And so people have explained this, and this comes up, it must come up in Christine Hayes' video series, which is great. Jean Botero, for example, is sort of one of the people that early on after Krauss pointed this out in a very popular level book. It's like, hey, these aren't legislative. They're not normative in the sense that like Hammurabi's not going, boom, here are the laws now, right? They're doing something else, right? And there are different ways that people think about them, but what they're not is legislation in the sense that we think about it today. Well, the problem is that that's a really cool piece of information that you can really screw up, right? And I cannot tell you how many times I've been in a conversation and we're talking about slavery, for example. And we say, look, here, Leviticus 25, 44 to 46, you can have foreign chattel slaves. Well, the law is not legislative. So you can't say that God is legislating that, right? These are just descriptive. And I just oh man, you know, like, okay, let's back up. Let me explain what you're saying. Because like that's it's knowing. It's like the definition of knowing just enough to be dangerous. Yeah. So when you hear stuff like that, something that sounds really cool, and oh man, that's like, run that by somebody. Hey, am I understanding this right? And if you want to make this new argument that you don't think other people have, like, run it by somebody not live, right? Yeah. And say, hey, what do you think about this?
Probably not on modern day debate, but
right. Hey, that's not a good place to throw that stuff out.
But I think, like, as you're saying that too, like, something about these, there's a lot of like fundamental, pretty simple points, you know, that like the people in academia just take for granted, you know, that like if you're this far down the line, you obviously understand this. Like, it's like math, you know, you're not going to read a Calculus 4 textbook and somebody's going to start explaining, like, you know, how to do addition or whatever. They're going to take that for granted.
Right. But, or like nobody's going to read the Sargon's 8th campaign, right? And when they read about Sargon like going ahead of the army and breaking through the mountain by himself and destroying the other, you know, nobody's going to stop and say, "Now look, that's not really what happened." Yeah. Right? He didn't really do that. Nobody's going to stop and do that. Because they assume that you know this genre.
But it's really easy, like in like just online, you know, personal study, to, if you neglect the fundamentals, to just be like, to not really grasp that because you haven't heard it. You know, they're obviously not going to say it in these books. So I think that's really good. That's really important. And I don't know if I saw too many others. Travis had asked a little bit about John Walton, who you kind of touched on. Like, he has some really good stuff and some of the stuff, but there is some more fringe, you know, material. And like you said, you're not necessarily commenting on all of his work or anything like that.
Definitely not. No. And that's, maybe I should, let me be just very quickly really clear about this. Clear that up. Like, John Walton is a great scholar. I don't think anybody, but I guess what I'm trying to say is, if you're reading through some of his work and you come up on something and you say, man, that sounds really neat and new, I haven't heard this before, like, go read some other people and see what they think about it. One of the things that I hate, and I'm getting ready to vent for a second. But one of the things that I hate right now about being an independent scholar is that I don't have library access anymore. I can't search the Hopkins website and pull up all the, the different journals that I used to be able to pull up. And so it takes a while to find recent reviews of people's work. But like Dennis Pardee, for example, did a review of John Walton's work on Genesis 1 and his understanding of like the creation process and organization. And it's a good criticism, right? He has a good review. And those are important things to read. Because that's a position that, while a lot of what he says is like straight, right on, yeah, like I agree with it, that's one where it's like, no. And if that's the thing that you pick up and run with, you're probably going to bump into other scholars that are going, yeah, we don't really agree with him on that.
For sure. And that's really good. And we got another one. JB is asking why you keep avoiding coming on his channel to talk about Satan in the Old Testament.
Well, I'm afraid that JB is just going to tear me up.
Yeah.
I mean, let's be honest here, right? He's just rough and tumble.
Exactly.
And I'm a sensitive.
Yeah.
I'm a sensitive
He's been
guy,
talking to Rabbi Tovia Singer, and he just.
That was such a. That was. If
that
you
was
guys
cool.
haven't watched that, it was such a great conversation. I really enjoyed watching that. Yeah, I'm running from him. That's all there is.
Yeah,
I run from everybody.
That's for sure. I had to nail you down to get on here, No, this was really good. I think we kind of hit on. I mean, Math Pig asked something about what kind of dinosaur did Moses ride onto the ark or something like that, but I think that's where we're kind of getting off the track.
It's a diplodocus.
Okay.
That's what it was. A diplodocus. And the reason I'm so proud of myself, our 3-year-old has a dinosaur book, and
nice.
one of the ones that I was like, that was a diplodocus. I now know what a diplodocus is.
Yeah, that's something I never thought about. It's probably gonna be funny when I start like learning things from like my kids' books or whatever. I feel stupid, right? Like, hey, I'm supposed to know all this stuff already.
Our 8-year-old asks us about 17 times a day, what's the difference between healthy food and junk food? And we're like, we know you know the answer to this, but okay, we'll tell you again.
But then it gets kind of complicated because I guess it's really like, it's all like, we get carbs and fat, but then like, why is this fat bad? I'm like the worst.
Right, exactly.
Because I like think about this stuff. I swear, I'm like so scared for when my kids get older to start, because I like, just I don't know, I have like the worst. I'll start thinking about like the weirdest things, and I swear I'm gonna like tell it to my kids, and they're gonna be so confused. But whatever. No, this was really fun. I really enjoyed this. I think, me too. I think a lot of people can actually like learn a little bit from this. Like it's really good to just, how do we need to think about these things and have better conversations? That's what's important, because the people like the thing I've like real like you're not. Some YouTuber is probably not going to be the next one that like comes up with the greatest idea on like the to prove that Moses wrote the Old Testament or whatever. That's probably not where it's going to come from. But what we can do is make progress on like understanding these topics as a whole and like communicating them to people and stuff like that. And that's what's really important. And I think that's what channels like yours and a lot of, like, I look at yours, I look at, like, Myth Vision's doing some really cool stuff, interviewing some really cool people, and, there's some good channels out there that definitely, maybe mine will be one of those soon enough, but who knows. But, I really enjoyed this, so if you kind of want to say, definitely people need to check out Doc Josh's book. I put a link to his website with all his books in the description. And
on there is a preview.
True,
I think.
I meant to mention that.
Yeah, so you can go take a look at it. The pages, we realized that, not we, Megan, because Megan's been doing all the work, but she realized that we had it in a 6x9, I think. So it's actually going to be a slightly bigger book, 7x10 maybe. I'm not sure. So the pages, it's not like 520 or whatever anymore. I think it's like 440.
The amount of pages. Oh, I see.
Yeah.
The amount of pages.
Yeah, because the book is physically bigger now.
Yeah, that's pretty. I think that's cool how you guys are like publishing your own books and stuff and do all that stuff. I'm sure it's a lot of work, but I think it's really cool. And
Yeah, and hopefully, hopefully that we can make that available to other like up and coming scholars that want to publish a popular level version of their work. Like I think that would be really useful. I had fun. Like this one.
Yeah, the How to Pray in Sumerian or whatever.
Yeah, this is my dissertation, but nobody would. I mean, my dissertation's free on our web. I think it's on our website. If not, you can get it free online somewhere. PDF of it. But people probably aren't interested in reading that in that form. But putting it into this popular level book, and then Megan took it and made it even more interesting. I wanted to read it again when she was done with it. So, yeah. So anyway.
Yeah, no, that's cool. That's kind of how I got started really like diving into the scholarship though. It was Dr. Carmen Imes. I don't know if you're familiar with who that is, but she wrote her dissertation all about like the second commandment and how it really has nothing to do with like speech and like what you say. It's more about like, bearing God's name. Is more about like living your life as like a representative of God and all this. But she turned her dissertation into a popular level book, and I thought that was really cool. So that's kind of like similar to what you were just mentioning there. But yeah, like I said, this was really fun. I hope everybody enjoyed watching. If you're not subscribed to my channel, please do. It really helps. We've been growing a little slowly but surely. But we were like, as I close this out, if you're not subscribed, you need to subscribe, because I was pretty close with John's channel, and then he blew up. He's at like 800 or something, and I'm pretty mad about it. So.
What a bum.
Yeah, exactly. I'm a little salty that he got so far ahead. So if you don't like John like me, subscribe to my channel so we can pass him. But no, with that, everybody check out Dr. Josh's stuff, and we